So today we'll be doing something a little bit different. Usually we speak about the Bible, but I had the feeling that in order to better understand the New Testament, people need to better understand the period Jesus lived in.
Montana, would you please translate for us?
Yeah. 皆さん、こんにちは。今日のテーマはいつもとちょっと違います。聖書をちゃんと学ぶために、イエスが、生きていた時代をちゃんと理解しなければいけないと私は思います。だから、時代の歴史を今日のテーマです。
So we'll begin with the first major event, which is the Maccabean revolt that happened around 160 BC. So before the Maccabean revolt, we had a Greek occupation of Jewish territories in the Holy Land. And afterwards, the success of the revolt led to a Jewish kingdom. And that Jewish kingdom would lead to a spiritual and religious awakening that would create those different factions within Judaism. Not surprisingly, I think some of you have already heard it. The Maccabean revolt is also the story of the holiday of Hanukkah.
最初はマカビ戦争でした。この話をみんなも知ってるかもしれないけど、ハヌカの話でした。ユダヤ人が、ギリシャ人を倒して、それからまた、人が神様のもとに戻って、そしていろんなグループに分かれました、ユダヤ人が。
Now, so if you've already heard the story, you'd know that the reason for the rebellion was different decrees by the Greek that forced Jews to behave against their faith. For example, eating pork or worshipping Greek gods.
皆さんも知ってるかもしれないけど、マカビ戦争の前にギリシャ人がユダヤ人の立法を、禁止にしました。そして、ユダヤ教に、逆らう、立法を作りました。例えばユダヤ人が、豚肉を、食べさせられましたとか、ギリシャの神を、賛美させられました。そういうこと。
Thank you. And that leads us to the first group that appeared before the rebellion, which are the Hellenistic Jews. Now, they appeared during the time of the Greek occupation. What signifies them is that they combined the Jewish faith and the Jewish law with the Greek culture, meaning the Greek philosophy or even Greek's way of behavior. They also spoke the Greek language. I think in the Japanese version of the Bible, they even call them Girishago, or so they even define them by the language.
最初のグループはそのマカビ戦争の前でした。ヘレニズ的ユダヤ人でした。彼らは、ギリシャの文化と、ギリシャ語を、学んで、そしてそれをユダヤ人と、ユダヤの文化と、混ぜた。
So another thing that signifies them is that during the Greek occupation, because they spoke Greek and behaved Greek, they had privileges and they had much closer ties to the ruling occupying forces, and that caused a divide between the Hellenistic Jews and the non-Hellenistic Jews. Their privilege of the Hellenistic Jews and their much less religious nature caused them to be more hated by the Aramaic Jews. And we also see that in the Bible, in the book of Acts, in chapter 6.
そのヘレニズム的のユダヤ人がギリシャの政府に強いつながりがあって、そして彼らが他のユダヤ人に比べてあんまり、信仰的じゃありませんでした。だから他のユダヤ人に、嫌われました。これを、アクツ6章でよく見えます。
Now, what is important to remember is that despite them appearing early, they remained for a very long time. So we still know about Hellenistic Jews that existed in the Middle Ages. And while the Jewish kingdom in Judea began very pure Jewish, as time progressed, they became more and more Hellenistic. And the leaders began to have Greek names and more and more of a Greek way of ruling. Eventually, by the time we reach Christ, the Jewish kingdom fell and Rome took over.
このグループは最初は小さかったけど、結構長い時間でユダヤ人の中にいて、そして、マカビ戦争の後も、ユダヤ王国が、作られたの後も、人がますますヘレニズム的になりました。ユダヤ人のリーダーまで、ヘレニズム的な名前がありました。そして、最後にイエスが、生きていたときに、ユダヤ王国がローマに、taken over、
移譲された？取られた？
はい。
Okay. So the next group we will be talking about is yes.
Before we move on from Hellenistic Jews, may I just chime in?
Sure.
I think you forgot to emphasize something very important about Hellenistic Jews in the way that they weren't just hated; they were considered. They were really considered traitors because they went against the big commandment of having no God other than God, because they didn't just start becoming becoming more Greek in culture. They started trying to appease the Greeks by believing their gods as well. So that's something I think that should be overemphasized.
So from what I checked, it is a very diverse group, but yes, some of the Hellenistic Jews even began believing in the Greek religion. However, it is depending on who. They were very diverse in that aspect. For example, the Hashmonae Hellenistic Jews didn't believe in foreign gods. So the Pharisees are a very famous group in the New Testament, and they appear around 150 BC. That is around 10 years after the Maccabean revolt. The Pharisees believe in the oral Torah, that is the spoken law, and also the written Torah, the written law. And they also believe that there is an afterlife, and in that afterlife we're going to be judged and rewarded for our actions. And they also believed in the option of a resurrection, meaning that in the day of days or the day of judgment, God will resurrect the dead.
ファリセの人たちが、マカビ戦争の 10年の後で初めて現れました。彼らが、九伝律法と聖書の両方を、信じました。それから天国と、人がいつか、よみがえるを信じました。
So the Pharisees were mostly the commoners and the general populace, meaning they weren't very rich or had connections, but they were popular, and they were also the largest group. And the meaning of the name Pharisees, it comes from the Hebrew word of lifosh, to resign, because it's not sure from whom they resigned. It is said that they supposedly resigned from the majority of Israel that did not know the Torah and decide to learn it. And after the destruction of the Second Temple, from the Pharisees will grow the modern day rabbinic Judaism, meaning from their beliefs and from their ideas. And when Kazo and I searched for Pharisees in the Bible, we found out that they appear over 100 times. However, I decided that Matthew chapter 23 better describes them best from a Christian point of view, which is, woe to you, Pharisees, you hypocrites, and 7 points against their hypocrisy.
ファリシーは、別に金持ちとか政府の人じゃありませんでしたが、すごく大きなグループでした。ファリシーの意味は、ヘブライのリフロッシュから来ます。やめるということです。今日のユダヤ人とラビがもともとそのグループの一部でした。新約聖書でファリシーが、100倍、100度、現れます。100 times。しかし、一番よく、説明されるところは、マタイ23章です。I have no idea how to say hypocrisy, but it's
偽善者。
偽善者。ファリシの偽善者のことを教えられているところです。
Thank you very much. Now, the next group also appeared around the time of the Pharisees in 150 BC, and that is the Sadducees. Now, the Sadducees, what makes them different from the Pharisees is that they believed only in the written Torah and the written law. They rejected the oral traditions. They did not believe it came from Mount Sinai and from God. And they also did not believe that there would be a day of reckoning where all the dead will be resurrected, or that there is an afterlife in which we get the rewards for our actions. Meaning the Sadducees believe that good deeds will be rewarded in this life and bad deeds will be rewarded in this life. Now, the Sadducees were mostly aristocrats and wealthy people. They had, we know about them not because they were a big group, but because they were the one with the most influence. They had holding of the rulership and of they were also some of them were, and many of them were the priests of the Second Temple, and etc., etc.
小さなグループでしたが、結構強いグループでした。だから今日も彼らが信じたことを、分かります。彼らが、政府の一部でお金持ちで、そして、 祭司も、彼らの中に祭司もありました。彼らが、ただ聖書の両方だけを信じて天国がありませんと、思って、そしていつか人がよみがえることは信じませんでした。彼らが主に今日、人のご褒美はこの人生だけでもらえると思いました。
And the Sadducees disappeared after the Second Temple was destroyed. Their lack of belief for the oral law eventually led that they could no longer pass their traditions. Their traditions revolved around the temple and the sacrifices and the practices that were written. And after the temple was destroyed, they could no longer pass their traditions, and so they disappeared eventually. We see the Sadducees mentioned in Matthew chapter 22, verse 23, where it is also written as well that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection.
サドカイのグループは、ニカミドの放課後、消えました。彼らが信じたこと、は、ベタミグダッシュ、全部ベタミグダッシュに通いましたので、ニカミドの崩壊後から彼らにはもう信じることがありませんでした。新約聖書でマタイ22章23節で、彼らが、人がよみがえることを信じませんでしたと書いています。
The next group is an interesting group. I had a picture. Never mind. These are the Essenes. They also, yeah, they also appeared around 150 BC. And there's still a mystery to this day because they didn't have many sources regarding them. We do know that they lived around the Dead Sea area and in the deserts of Judea. And they had a belief in communal life and in the equality of each of its members and in loving each other. And they were quite pacifists, meaning that the Essenes mostly focused on studying practices of medicine or cooking or farming, and less about weapon making or fighting. From scrolls that were found in the Dead Sea, we also know that they believed in a war of the end of days between those who would be the sons of light and those who would be the sons of darkness. The Essenes also believed that they're the only righteous people and that all the rest of the population in Judea are sinners. And because it was such a mystery cult that mostly had men in it, we don't really know how they disappeared or what happened to them. We just know that they disappeared around the Second Temple. And something important to say is that while they do not appear in the Bible, there are researchers that claim that Essene practices became Christian practices. For example, it is said that the Essene practice of a common dinner between everyone was the Last Supper, or that the idea of a communal life without private property became the life of the disciples of Jesus as they gave up their possessions and lived together in a humble life.
エセネは、戦いが嫌って、 勉強し、いろんなことを勉強しました。彼らがコミュニティみたいな生活を求めて、そしていつか最後に大きな戦争が来て、そして光の息子と闇の息子が、大きな戦争をすると信じました。彼らは、自分だけが正しいで、他の民族が、罪人だと思いました。二カメドの崩壊後の時に、
第二神殿の崩壊後
第二神殿で、消えました。今日 SNA、クリスチャンはもともと SNA だと信じている人があります。例えば、彼らがみんな一緒に、夕食をするのがよく、しました。これがラストサッパーと人が思います。そして彼らには荷物がありませんでした。みんなが一緒に、みんなの荷物でした。イエスの、生徒と同じように。はい、以上です。
Thank you very much. Well, unfortunately, we don't have much information, so that's where I'll stop talking about them. Now, this was called by a Jewish historian the fourth philosophy at the time, the Sikari. They appear around 60 AD. So they appear after the death of Christ and during the beginning of the first Church of Christ, as the disciples spread the Torah, the words of Christ. Now, they are violent. The Sikari were violent zealots, terrorists, assassins, and they believed that by achieving Jewish independence from Rome, the Messiah will come. So their actions were to burn things. They burned institutions of rulership or food storages. They would. Their name comes from the dagger, the sika, which is, as you can see, this thing. So they would hide it in their cloak and walk to rallies or a big group, and then would pull out their daggers and stab other Jewish people and other people in general. And what they try to do is to start a rebellion against Rome so that there would be a Jewish independence. However, they were disliked by most of the people that lived at that period. They were scary, they were violent, and they were too zealot. They always thought that they are the only true Jewish people, that their faith is the only true faith, and that others deserve to die. Despite the fact that they appear later, it is believed that Judas Iscariot held Sikari beliefs, and that perhaps was a part of the Sikari. And they are mentioned in the book of Acts. The part where I gave in Acts chapter 5, verse 37, the group of Judah of Galilee is the group that would become the original Sikari. So Judah of Galilee was a rebel who tried to free the Galilee from the Romans. And the group that followed him after disbanding began spreading their ideas and to form the Sikari group. Eventually, because they were so violent, and after the Great Rebellion, the Jewish-Roman War of 70 AD ended with a defeat to the Jews, Rome would eventually hunt down and kill all those of the Sikari, so they would not survive.
最後のグループはシカリでした。 彼らが、イエスが生まれた後で現れました。あの時もイエスには、生徒がありました。彼らが、テロリストみたいな人でした。結構暴力で暗殺者みたいな人でした。彼らの名前、シカリは、その小さなナイフから、彼らが使っていた小さなナイフ、シカから、来ました。彼らが、ローマと戦って、そしていつかローマを倒せばメシアが来ると信じていました。ガリレのユダ、も、叱りだった、かもしれない。そして、イスカリオテのユダ、はい、イスカテのユダでした。1780年でローマが、その戦争、で勝って、そして叱りが全員、殺されました。はい、以上です。
Thank you very much. And the last group is eventually the group that we all know, the Jewish Christians, or the early Christians, if you would like to call them that. So they appeared during Jesus's lifetime, obviously, and they grew in numbers after his resurrection. They were the disciples and followers of Jesus during his life, or the disciples and followers of the 12 disciples after the resurrection. Now, what signifies them from modern day Christians is that they not only believed in the teachings of Jesus and that Jesus is the Messiah, but they also believed in Jewish law, and they combined the Torah, the Jewish law, with the teachings of Jesus. And obviously they appear in the New Testament because it is written, a lot of it is written about them, about the disciples of Jesus, and about the faith and the beginning of Christianity. And we do know that they were also a popular group. So unlike the Sadducees, for example, who were the nobility, the Jewish Christians were much like the Pharisees. They were mostly the common people and the popular and the general populace. And eventually they would develop into modern Christianity and the Messianic Judaism. So after the resurrection, when the disciples began converting many Gentiles, there was some divide, and those who would rather keep keep the Jewish law would eventually grow into the faction known as Messianic Judaism, which combined the Jewish law with the teachings of Jesus. And those who won't will convert into the standard Christianity that we know today.
最後のグループは、イエスの人生の時に、そしてイエスが生きていたその後にも、ありました、いずれクリスチャンになったユダヤ人でした。このグループは結構、大きいグループでした。サドカイと違ってもっとファリシーと、似てました。すごく大きなグループで、すごくポピュラーでした。最初は彼らが、ユダヤ教の律法を信じて、そしてそれを、イエスの教えと、混ぜた。新約聖書はほとんどすべての話は彼らのことでした。いずれこのグループは、分かれました。メシアニック・ジューズが、まだユダヤ教の律法を守って、そして、も もっと大きな、もう一つのもっと大きなグループは、今日の、みんながしているのクリスチャンです。彼らがただイエスの教えを守ります。はい、以上です。
Thank you very much. And so that was most of the important factions. Probably there were smaller cults or factions, but they did not have enough influence. So what was the relation between Jesus or the early church and most of them? So Hellenistic Jews, it is unknown. I didn't manage to find a passage where Jesus speaks with them directly. אם את יכולה לדבר יותר בשקט. And we do know, however, that most of the Hellenistic Jews interacted with Paul and Peter as they went to the centers of Hellenistic Judaism and tried to convert them. And so they either converted or acted with violence towards Paul and Peter. The Pharisees, for the Pharisees, they were called out for their hypocrisy, and they were in competition with the early Christians because they both had the same populace. They both competed for the common people of the land of Israel.
今まではあの時の、一番大事なグループでした。これから彼らの、イエスとの関係のことを話します。最初はヘレニズム的のユダヤ人。彼らが、ポールとペテロと、話しました。結構暴力的な関係でした。そして次はファルシーでした。彼らが、最後のグループキリスト教とメシアニック・ジュディズムと、ちょっとライバルでした。2人は結構大きなグループでしたから、人の心を普通の人の心争う。Thank you. Can you maybe translate for me the last part? I was having a lot of trouble with it. It's about the Pharisees, that they were called hypocrites, and they were a big group like the Hellenists, like the Christian group, and they were always competing because the common people went to both groups.
Pharisee and the Sadducee competing?
The Pharisees and the Christian group.
OK。パリサイ派とですね、ユダヤ人クリスチャンというのがいつもこう言い争いをこうしていたということがわかります。
So with the Sadducees, it's about the same thing. Jesus would call out their hypocrisy, and we do know that they sometimes debated, Christians and Sadducees. However, because they had different influence groups, they weren't in such a direct competition. The Sadducees were mostly the aristocrats and the people of the Second Temple, while Jesus spoke mainly to the common people. So we just know that he called out their hypocrisy. With the Essenes, we don't know if they ever met. Again, they were mysterious, and we don't have many written testimonies of them, so we have no idea if they ever met. But it is assumed that Jesus would know about them because, again, some of the early Christian practices were very much like the Essene practices. And Sicarii appeared after Jesus passed away, and we do know that they are considered bad, even by the disciples, which is obvious. They were violent terrorists, and we don't really accept much from them. And eventually the Jewish Christians, they were the disciples and followers of Jesus. So we know that that's their interactions.
サドカイのグループは、小さなグループだったけど、結構強いグループでしたので、ファリシーとユダヤクリスチャングループとよく、喧嘩しました。イエスに偽善と、と呼ばれました。SN のグループは、まあ、今もう不明だけど、彼らの文化は、キリスト教と結構似ていると言われています。光のグループはイエスが死んだ後で現れましたが、他のグループに嫌われました。すごく暴力的でしたので、そして最後に、ユダヤ人クリスチャンはもちろん、イエスとの関係をみんなしてますね。以上です。
Thank you very much. So in summary, so these are the different groups, the major groups that acted during that period and their fate. So Hellenistic Jews, as you know, some converted to Christianity, but many of them disappeared with time. They got swallowed into the Roman Empire or simply ceased to exist. It is unclear how they ended up. With the Pharisees, we know that they evolved into the Rabbinic Judaism, and with the Sadducees, Essenes, and the Sicarii, we do know that they disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple. They didn't survive that event. And with Jewish Christianity, we know that the Jewish Christians, we know that they would develop into the modern Christians and the Messianic Judaism.
今日はヘルニズムジューズはもう残っていません。彼らが少しキリスト教の一部になりましたが、他のヘレニズムジューズが消えました。もしかしてロマ人になったとか、それともロマ人に殺されたとか、今日は不明です。ファリセイが、いずれ今日の、ラビの、ジュダイズム、になりました。サドカイが、第二神殿、Is that how it said? 第二神殿
You're right.
Thank you. の破壊後で、消えました。光も、SN も光も、そうです。最後にユダヤ人クリスチャンが2つのグループに分かれて、今日はメシアニック・ジューズと、普通のクリスチャン、になりました。
Thank you very much. So that is all for today, I think, from me. Thank you very much for listening. どうもありがとうございました。And if someone has any questions or points, this would be the time.
Omer, thank you very much. It was a great presentation, and for Japanese and Gentile, those history is not unknown and not clear, so it is very important teaching for us. はい、違法人とか日本人はですね、この歴史の部分がよく分かってないので、本当に今日の内容は素晴らしかったと思います。ありがとうございます。
Kazuo-san, do you mean like extra information and stuff?
Yes, and extra information and Christian, anything.
Oh, then I can start if you'd
Please.
like.
お願いします。
So first of all, thank you very much, Omer. That was awesome. specifically, I really, really like this topic, so I'm so glad you chose to speak about it. When I was in school, my teacher was really interested in the Isim group. So this is a specific group that we learned about more than normally do in typical Israeli high schools. And there were very interesting different customs within those different Jewish groups. I think I told Kazu in the past that if you visit here in Jerusalem, a place called Heichal HaSefer, so you can see some relics that were found later in history. And a very good example for that is the tefillin, for example, which is the thing that you put, males put on their forehead, and the leather bands that they wrap around their arms when sometimes praying. So today's tefillin is the size of a small jewelry box, I would say. You can see it in Google very easily if you search for tefillin. And it is probably the tefillin that the Parusim or the Tzedokim had. And Omer mentioned that the Isim had this very humble way of life. So they made their tefillin as tiny as possible. And if you visit this place, Heichal HaSefer, so you can see the tiny, tiny scrolls that they had inside of their tefillin. And it is about the width of my fingernail. It's really, really tiny. So that's one example of how these factions were so different from each other. Yeah, thank you very much, Omer. I had a great time.
So I didn't know about that tefillin thing, but it's really cool.
Yeah, they also, this is even weirder, but specifically the Isim, they were very much into holy things to the extent that during Shabbat, not only did they keep Shabbat like Jews do today, but for example, they didn't go to the bathroom during Shabbat at all. You were forbidden from relieving yourself during Shabbat. They were pretty extreme.
オメル、今日のトピックを、すごく面白くて、選んでくれてありがとうございます。高校の時に、先生が SN にすごく興味、ありましたので、SN のことをよく勉強しました。彼らにはいろんな面白い伝統があって、例えば、シャボットの時に彼らは、お手洗いを使いませんでした。とか、それぞれのグループが使っていた、本とか、聖書、そしてトゥフィリン、エルサレムの、本の博物館で、見えます。それぞれのグループにはすごく違うトゥフィリンを使っていたんです。すごく小さいとか、めちゃくちゃ大きなトゥフィリンとか結構違いました。エルサレムのイスラエル博物館の、近くにありますから、もしかしたら、イスラエルの博物館に行ったら、ぜひ本の博物館も見てください。はい、以上です。
はい。アビガエル、ありがとうございます。モンタナムトランスレーションありがとうございます。じゃあ次ですね。サギ、do you have any other comment or additional thought, question?
Well, I think for the most part it was very well contained. There was enough information about each group and the information that's needed for this topic. I don't think I have anything else that I can add. I thought it was a very well presentation.
オメルそれぞれのグループのことを、ちゃんと教えてくれてありがとうございました。他に言いたいことが、ないです。
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think well, the second temple period is large enough to fill an entire university course. And I did try to make it as concise as possible.
University course or an entire degree?
Maybe both.
短かったけど、本当にいろんなグループのことを話したかったから、今日はこれしか言えませんでした。
じゃあ、モンタナ、do you have your comment? Any question?
I think now if Omar can explain now, that would be great. And if another time, then that's also okay. I'd like to know more about where the split happened between the Messianic Christians and the standard Christians. オメルに質問があります。メシアニック・ジュディズムと普通のクリスチャンはいつ分かれましたか？
So I found some very limited information on this, but as we know, in the beginning, Christianity and the following of Jesus began as a very Jewish thing. So it was mostly Jews, and afterwards, after the decision to accept Gentiles, it happened during Jesus's time, but it became very significant after his passing, as the disciples would actively go and convert Gentiles. So that caused a split because some Jews felt that it is important to maintain it as a Jewish thing. And they would slowly resign from Christianity. But it really happened, I think, around the foundation of the actual church, because at that point, it was made clear that they're intending to make it a different religion and not just like a spiritual thing or a Jewish thing. And that caused the Jews that followed Jesus to feel very uncomfortable. And so they would split.
2つのグループが分かれたときは、最初イエスが現れたときにほとんど、生徒たちがほとんど、全員、ユダヤ人でしたが、いずれ、で、I forgot the word for Gentiles. 違法人も、イエスに誘われました。そしてイエスが、亡くなったから、イエスの生徒がますます、違法人を誘って、そして教会が作られたときに、そこにいたユダヤ人が、これはもう、ユダヤ教的じゃないと感じて、そのグループから離れました。はい、以上です。
And something else very cool that I found out. So, at the beginning, Christians wasn't the word to describe followers of Jesus, especially not the Jewish followers of Jesus. They called themselves the Way, and that is a reference to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. Prepare the way of the Lord. Christian was a term that was given to them later on by Greeks, I think.
もう一つ面白いこと 昔クリストの名前は、The Way、道でした。イザヤ40章3節で、神様の道を作っている人、と書いているから、昔クリストが自分のこと、The Way と呼ばれました。クリストその名前が、実はローマ人に、与えられました。
Very interesting.
これはオメルが作ったんですね。
はい、そうです。
すごいですね。
素晴らしい。
すごくわかりやすくて、まとまっていて、素晴らしいティーチングだったと思います。ユダヤ人、最後のユダヤ人クリスチャン、最初はユダヤ人クリスチャンユダヤ人だけだったと思うんですけど、この異邦人もそのイエス様を信じるようになったのは、ペンテコステ五巡節の日以降だと思うんですよね。で、ペンテコステの日にこの聖霊が与えられてからこう変わったっていうか、流れが変わったというふうに思うので、すごくこの使徒の働きの2章に出てくる、アクトの2章に出てくる話がすごく重要なことだなというふうに思いました。それと、今のクリスチャンっていうのは、異邦人のクリスチャンはほとんどがこうヘレニズム的なクリスチャンが多くて、こうヘブライズム的なクリスチャン、メシアニックな自由的なクリスチャンがすごく少ないので、ヘブライズムですね。ヘブライ、11種のこう考え方を受け継ぐクリスチャンがもっと増えたらいいなというふうに思っています。はい。オメル、すごい素晴らしいティーチングをありがとうございました。
Thank you for this presentation. What you learned in the presentation was really easy to understand, and I think you picked a wonderful subject. Regarding the subject of the split between Messianic Christians and standard Christians, so at first, like you said, there were really only Jewish Christians, and then the Gentiles joined once in an event during when the Spirit came down during Pentecost. That's Shavuot, I think, right? Or is it Sukkot?
Shavuot.
Shavuot. Thank you. In the book of Acts, chapter 14, I think it was.
Chapter 2.
Oh, thank you. Acts chapter 2. And a really important factor to take into account when you look at the two different groups is that today's Christians are very heavily influenced by the Hellenistic Christians from the period of Hellenism when Rome, during the Roman Empire. And then if you look, so then you have two groups. You have the Christians that are descendant of these Hellenistic Christians, and you also have the Messianic Jews who were part of a more Hebrew-centric group. And they're a much smaller group, the Messianic Jews. And it would be great if this group got bigger. So thanks again, Omel, for picking such a nice topic to talk about today. That's it.
Thank you. In addition, Saguchi Sensei is willing to have more Christian who has an influence from Judaism. I think that's he hope. Thank you. じゃあ、あゆむさんをコメントお願いいたします。
はい。 Thank you, Omo. I really enjoyed today's teaching, and it was excited, and it was really well organized, and it helped me to understand each groups of people in Israel on the back of day in where Jesus lived, and then I also realized again that how small I understood about these groups, even though I knew there are Pharisees and Sadducees and Essenes and those groups, but I didn't really know much information more than what you just told us today. So I really enjoyed this. Sharing. Thank you for preparing. That's all. はい。今日のこのトピック通して、それぞれのグループがどのような背景だったりとか、どのような人たちだったのかっていうのを詳しく知ることができて、すごく感謝でした。学びが深まりました。パリサイ派とかサドカイ派っていうのはすごく、それぐらいはすごい聖書の中でよく出てくるんで、耳にはしてたんですけれども、他のエッセネ派、シカリ派だったりとか、ヘレニズム的ユダヤ人、その他含めて、さらに今日、オメールを通して多く学ばせていただきたんで、本当にいい時間でした。ありがとうございます。
Yes, so what I'd like to share one verse, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 15. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 15. So Sagi, can you please read Ephesians chapter 2, 5, verse 15?
By setting aside his flesh and the law with its commandments and regulations, his purpose was to create in himself one new humility out of the two, thus making peace.
Thank you. So, I will read in Japanese. ご自分の肉において敵意を廃棄された方です。敵意とはさまざまな規定から成り立っている戒めの律法なのです。このことは2つのものをご自身において新しい一人の人に作り上げて平和を実現するためです。So, I'm wondering, what is this one new man is? So, when I listen Omer's presentation, this verse is appearing in my heart. So I'm wondering what is the one new man is. So,
So I haven't read Ephesians yet, but from what I see here, it's and at least in the letter to Ephesians, it seems that the writer suggests that by Jesus' death and sacrifice, he has abolished the barrier between Gentiles and Jews and creating a united group of humans. So maybe that's the thing. It's maybe the new humanity is one where there is no difference between the Gentile and the Jew.
I see. Understand. Okay. Montana, would you please translate for us?
私は、多分ユダヤ人と異邦人が、つながる、のことです。彼らが別れたところから、また、一つになるのこと。
Thank you. Hi. So, through the Omer's presentation and also your current comment, so if we can make this one new man to fulfilled by us, that would be wonderful. We understand each other and And also, Abigail's comment is sharing was also very wonderful. So I could learn a lot. So maybe our New Revelation Church is a bit unique because all of us is trying to study Hebrew. So it may be a new group, and I try to learn from Jewish. So I hope our group will make a good influence to other Japanese Christians. And yes, we have a very good, our church network is quite large and very strong and like a big family. So we hope that we can make a good family as well. 今この歴史を学ぶことでまたオメルが言ってくれたみたいにお互いを学んで本当に一つのものになっていけばいいなと思います。レベチャは全員がヘブライ語を学んでいるっていうとてもユニークな教会で、そしてユダヤ人から学びたいと思っている教会なので、またそれ以外にもですね、日本にネットワークの教会があって、それらの絆も深くて、お互いが本当に大きな家族のようなので、本当にこの輪が広がっていったらいいなっていうふうに思いました。
はい、オメルはやっぱりティーチングのプレゼンスがあるんで、どんどんこうやってほしいなっていうふうに思いました。
Yes, Omer, you have a very good gift that you have a teaching skill. So we are waiting for you to share more things for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. 他に all of us, do you have any other comment or thought? If
あ
not,
と
はい。
アビガエルがね、エッセネ派についてすごく先生がこう関心があって、エッセネ派についてすごく勉強してたっていうのはすごく驚きでした。
そうですね。Sagut Sensei is impressed and surprised that Abigail's teacher was interested in SNS group, and yeah, it is very interesting for us. Thank you, Abigail.
My pleasure. I'll tell her that. I think she'll be very happy to know that I still remember what she taught me.
Yes. Yes.
バプテスマのヨハネがこのエッセネ派の人だったんじゃないかと言われてますね。
John Baptist may be one the member of the SNS group. そう、確かにオメルが言ってくれたイザヤ書の40の3のことが言ってくださいましたけど、なるほどと思いましたね。Sagut Sensei said that John Baptist may be SN っておっしゃいましたね、今。
はい。
John Baptist should be the member of SNS, and also I'm very impressed that Omer mentioned that Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3 is originated from the Christian name, and John Baptist said so. That's very interesting. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, John, I didn't think that John would be an Essene, but that explains the description of him dressed in a very humble garb and eating very simple foods.
なるほど、I see. このヨハネのですね、ヨハネがどんなふうに生活していたかっていう記述の中で、彼は蜜と、イナゴ を食べてすごく質素な生活をしていたというふうに言っているので、このエスネ派だったっていうことも考えられるんじゃないかなというふうに思いますということでした。エスネ派、はい、ありがとうございます。エスネ派、そう、アビガイル、yes, yes, エスネ派 is, we should learn more. エスネ group.
That's a fascinating addition. I had no, like Omar said, I didn't know of this, but it, like you said, it makes a lot of sense if you say it like that.
Yes. I thought it too.
はい、お願いします。天のお父様、今日はオンメールを通して素晴らしい学びを感謝します。オンメールたち、ヘブライ大学の大学生たちがもう早く大学に通ってキャンパスライフを楽しむことができるようにどうぞお守りください。困難な時代の中にあってもただ神様あなたに信頼します。この学びをいつも導いてくださる神様あなたに感謝します。イエス様の皆によってお祈りします。
バイバイ。
ありがとうございます。
ありがとう。
バイバイ。
またね。
またね。
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.